Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Mary Wang. I'm going to be talking about AWS security best practices today. Now, who am I? My name is Mary Wang, and my handle is Linux_girl. I have a bachelor degree in computer science and MBA. My background is software engineering, and 5 years ago, I switched to cybersecurity, and I never looked back. Currently, I'm a software engineering manager for a Fortune 500 company. Some of the certs I have is CISSP, CEH, and Security Plus. I'm really proud of myself that I was the President's Award winner in 2019 for an organization called Women's Society of Cyberjutsu. I'm also currently a WSC SoCal chapter lead. And some of the topics of interest I have are blue team, red team activities, DevSecOps, application security, reverse engineering, and threat hunting. I'm also a big fan of open source software. So what do I do during my free time? I like to work out. I like to do Zumba and swimming. And I also love to travel. You can see here, and I'm a mountain lake person. So as a disclaimer, all the views and thoughts, opinions expressed in this presentation belong to me. They're not necessary to my employer, organization, or any other group or individuals. Oh, so you use cloud computing, your work must be really secure. So I want to talk to you about my journey. So a few years ago, I heard so much about AWS S3 bucket leakage, and I was thinking, is cloud computing really secure? And I wasn't using AWS at work that time. So I thought the only way to get myself learning about it is to set myself a goal, is to study certification. In this case, I was studying for the AWS Certified Solution Architect Associate cert. So that's how I started getting into AWS. So this is really like hot out of the press. I got this a few weeks ago. The Gartner 2020 said by 2023, 75% of security failure will be missed because of mismanagement of IAM privileges. So think about it. We're talking about 75%. And so it's absolutely important that we know, as users of this, we know how to configure our system correctly. So before I even get started with all the AWS security services, it's so important that we have to understand the AWS Shared Responsibility Model. So if you look at the bottom here, we're looking at the security of the cloud is responsibility for AWS. That includes compute, storage, database, networking, availability zone, regions, and edge location. Now, as a customer, you and I, we're responsible for the top part, which is security in the cloud. So we're looking at customer content, platform, application, identity, access management, operating system, network firewall, client-side encryption, server-side encryption, network traffic. Now, depending on what services, some of the services you're pretty much responsible for everything, like patching your operating system, configure your firewall, and setting up your client-side encryption and server-side encryption. So again, we need to understand the responsibility model. Now I'm going to move on, talk about AWS Identity Access Management, and we call IAM. So what is IAM? IAM is a user identity system, and it really talks about which user can access what type of actions. And there are four objects associated with it. Those are users, groups, roles, policy of permissions. So let me get it into the deep dive of the AWS IAM object. So if you look at the left-hand side, we're looking at the user. So a user could be a person, a user could be an AWS service, or you have a special user called root, which you should never use that in a production system. And then user can be part of a group. So in this case, you're looking at a group of engineering. So all the engineering folks here can maybe access to read or write S3 buckets for the permissions. But if I were to create another group called HR, I probably don't want the HR folks to be able to write the S3 bucket. And then there's another thing called row. Row is really not associated with the user or group. It's really permissions that are assumed by trusted entities such as EC2. Now I'm going to talk about IAM best practices. Always enforce strong passwords. Use multi-factor authentication is a must, especially if you're talking about a root user. Once somebody has your password, the game is over. And don't use any privileges accounts. And never embed keys in the code, because I know a lot of pen testers were telling me, well, Mary, we see the keys in the GitHub code. And remove all the necessary IAM users and make sure audit access to resources. So I'm going to talk about logging now. This service is called AWS CloudTrail. And if you think about CloudTrail, it's really like a governance, compliance, and auditing. So when we do security work, a lot of times we need to make sure we take care of the regulatory requirement. So CloudTrail can do that. So it really pretty much says who did what on AWS. So things like the console actions, API calls, or events on other services. They're also being logged on CloudTrail. So here's another example of what CloudTrail is like. So you can see a CloudTrail could be a person is using a command line or the management console to access AWS resources. And those are all being logged in the Amazon CloudTrail. And that information is stored in the S3 buckets. So I'm going to show you some of the CloudTrail events. This first page is my trail that I created. And this is the S3 bucket associated with the trail. Now this one, you can actually customize with the tools that you have. But the one that I have is, you can see the first column's event name. I have some access key event type. Event time. And username, in this case, I have admin and root. Event resource, event source and resource type and resource name. Again, you can customize this. So now I'm going to move on to AWS CloudWatch. And CloudWatch, if you think about it, is really monitoring AWS resources and applications. It tracks metrics, monitor logs, and you can set alarm. And when I think about AWS CloudWatch, I think about looking at the resource utilization, application performance, and operation health. That type of information is where I would look for on CloudWatch. So I'm going to show you an example of a CloudWatch. So this is my EC2 instance. You can see, again, you can customize this look and feel. And I have network out average, also network packets in average and network in average. So that's an example of my EC2 instance CloudWatch page. Now I'm going to show you Elastic Block Storage. You can see, again, it shows the metrics of, in this case, read bytes, write bytes, and they're happening at certain time frame. I talk about the AWS Shared Responsibility. I talk about the AWS IAM. I talk about the AWS CloudTrail, and I talked about the AWS CloudWatch. Finally, I'm going to give you this information so you can walk away. I'm going to show you here. This is the AWS Security Best Practices. We talked about looking at the AWS Shared Responsibility Model And also, you need to define and categorize your assets. This is so important. You have to know exactly what your assets are, the reason for them, and define them. And then look at your AWS accounts, your IAM users, your groups, and roles. And lastly, you're going to be looking at continuous monitoring and logging. I want to thank you for attending my presentation. I hope to see you in the future again. And if you have any questions, make sure you post them at the Discord server.